Okay, episode 3, take 200 or something. I don't know how long I've been trying to make episode 3. Honestly, this shit is pretty boring to me. I don't really like it that much. Uh, so I haven't been doing it. I mean, I'm trying to make it fun and exciting to have my own show. I thought it would be cool, I guess. But the truth is, I never really wanted to be on YouTube or social media or all that crap. I never really cared about this stuff. So it's not really that exciting to me. It's like, I don't know, I'm just sitting here staring into my own webcam, which I'm using my webcam. I've been trying to film with my phone and make it look better, but the truth is, it just makes things harder. If I recorded the audio and the video separate, well, maybe that would be better for once I start uploading to other podcast places, but seriously, if I can't even consistently put out episodes, I don't even have to worry about Spotify or iTunes or any of that. I gotta be putting out episodes first. So this is episode 3. I'm just gonna talk for 30 minutes and then upload this shit the way I have been doing it. It's Saturday morning, November 20th, and normally I would be working right now. Normally I would be working all day. I'd normally work like 9 to 12 hours on a Saturday. But I am a independent contractor and I wasn't able to schedule any work for the day. So, unexpected day off. Maybe I'll get lucky and something will come up later and I'll be able to earn some money because I still need to earn some money for the week. I have a lot of hours tomorrow, but anyway, I figured why not? What better time to record episode number 3 of the James Howp Show than at a point in time where I have nothing else going on. I mean, come on. It's cold. I got coffee. You know, I didn't drink coffee for like over a year during COVID. I just stopped drinking coffee, all caffeine for a while. But now that it's getting cold, it turns out this is one of the few warm drinks that you can find everywhere. I suppose I could just drink warm water, but that sounds kind of whack. I mean, warm water? Imagine if you like go up to somebody in the middle of the cold and you're like, man, I'm freezing. And they're like, here, take a drink of this. And it's just some fucking hot water. Like, oh, man. Yeah, that'd warm me up. That'd get me heated all right. That'd warm up the temper a little bit. You'd probably just be more pissed off than anything. Like, why'd you just give me this hot water? Like, yeah, man. Has anything been going on? There's been stuff in the news, but I don't really care about it. Some trial, some kid shot people, or something. I don't even know what. The thing is, I don't pay that much attention to like the news and current events or whatever, because it's all distractions. They just tell you what they want you to think about. They don't tell you about more important shit that's really going on behind the scenes. It's all a distraction. It's all just a way for the CIA and the elites and the powerful and the wealthy people to keep everybody distracted and brainwashed and divided. So I don't really pay attention to all this bullshit. But with this current news that came out, I don't know, man. I'm going to have to just say, hopefully the judge and the jury and all that did their jobs right. Because, I mean, listen, I don't know that much about it. So, not talking about that specifically. I was recording last night, and I was learning about history, and actually what I've been learning about recently is the history of Rome, which never really used to interest me. I always thought Rome was boring, but it's actually pretty fascinating because there was this tiny little town, basically just a little village, that over the course of a few hundred years grows massive to the size of surrounding the entire Mediterranean from all directions, and even spreading out further than that. And the only direction they didn't really try to spread was Well, I mean, the Romans got stopped eventually. They couldn't go any more east because they just couldn't. They couldn't really go any further south because, well, they couldn't get past Egypt. And then they couldn't go. Well, they did go north a good bit, but they didn't get up into what we would call Scandinavia. And they couldn't get out into the ocean to the west. And I thought it was weird, like, that Romans didn't try to navigate the seas. But then I started learning about the numbers, and it turns out they were an empire for like 1,000 years. And it basically took them that whole time just to make it to the coast. Like, it basically took Rome almost 1,000 years to spread from their little town in Italy all the way out to the Strait of Gibraltar. So by the time they even knew that there was an ocean, it was like, hey man, we already spent 1,000 years and, probably just as many wars to get out here. Like, we're leaving that alone. Like, they weren't going to make it. To them, they thought that the seas was the Mediterranean, which is really it's really strange when you think about, like, the past like that, because what we're talking about, the Romans started in 750 BC, I think, somewhere around there. And they lasted up until the height of the empire, what's called the height of the Roman Empire. That was like 400 AD. So right there, automatically, you've got 1,150 years. And then the actual Roman Empire lasted like another 400 years until it basically totally collapsed. Although from 400 AD up until the end of it, somewhere between 7 to 800 AD, it really fell apart. Like, a lot of the nation states that they had conquered decided to basically secede from the Union. They started having to deal with wars on pretty much every side. They had people from the north coming in and skirmishing. They had people from the east coming in and skirmishing. I don't know about the south, but they probably just weren't able to hold the northern tip of Africa and Egypt and everywhere that they had conquered. Which, if I remember, was that the Phoenicians that lived there? I don't know. Anyway, there was a lot going on. And when I was recording yesterday, I had some more points about this. But, well, basically, it just got me thinking, like, what is it about certain places and certain people that you can have, like, one or two guys or a handful of people can start a little town, and somehow they can end up being so powerful that they spread out and conquer, like, a big chunk of the known world. Which, ironically, at the time, the known world wasn't the entire world. There were people all over that they didn't know about in Rome. Like, they didn't really know. I mean, they knew. I learned this. I was wondering if the Romans encountered Vikings. And it turns out that's impossible because Vikings didn't exist until after the Roman Empire. At least, they didn't exist as Vikings. But there were peoples up in what we know as Scandinavia, and they were pretty badass even before they were called Vikings. And actually, they were called the Goths and the Ostrogoths. And they were kind of, Rome had trouble with them. But also sometimes they were peaceful. There was a lot. I mean, we're talking about several hundred years of history here. But it's just interesting to me that this little town in Italy and was just able to grow and conquer such a big space. And by the time of the fall of the Roman Empire, one of the things that happened was the Mongols came up to the east. And the Mongols is a similar thing. Like, you've just got a small little village, basically, sort of a nomadic, the steppe people. That's what they called everybody that lived out in the steppes, I guess, which was out in Asia and areas like that, and kind of around what would now, some of it's part of what would now be China, some of it's part of, I don't know that part of the map, I'm really bad at maps, so I just don't know all the places, okay? Or their names, or who lives there, or what happened there, or anything like that. But anyway, that's another example. The Mongols is another example of like, you've got one or two people, a family basically, that decides, I guess, to just conquer the planet, and they pretty much do it. And it's like, wow, this is crazy. How does that, like, it just seems so wild that, because if you think about it, what do historians give credit for? Like, how do they explain that? How do they explain how these small groups turned into like massive conquering forces that took over the world? And usually they try to explain in terms of like technology or tactics, and that's a start. With Rome, part of what happened is that Rome was able to conquer Italy with relative ease. And that actually kind of surprised me, because one of the early events was the Romans conquered their two neighbors, and I forget their names, but basically they conquered the two neighboring city-states, and then everybody outside of that grouped up and formed the Latin League, is what it was called. And it was like just a conglomerate. It was basically just a confederation of all these other towns and cities that didn't want Rome to take them over. They were like, we're going to go kick Rome's ass now. So they all go in. They try to fight Rome, but it turns out they suck balls, so Rome wins. And then the Gauls, who I think, and like I said, I'm bad at maps, but I think the Gauls came from what we know as France. I think they came from there, but I'm not certain on that. I'm not a real historian, but I've just been learning about this stuff. And anyway, so these guys are like, okay, we're going to... Well, actually, this is the part I might mix up, but I think the Gauls and the Romans were kind of friends at first. And then the Romans did something to the Gauls. Oh, yeah, okay. So they were having some territorial disputes. And they had this big meeting. They got all the people together, like, and basically think of the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. That's pretty much what happened. Like, they got all their leadership together, and then, well, one old guy didn't secretly poison everybody and then cut all their throats. But they did get into a big argument of sorts at a feast, and all of a sudden people are throwing turkey legs, and they're throwing fucking lead plates and whatever the hell they have. And then some dude pulls his piece out, which at the time was just a sword, and he's stabbing some guy from the Gauls. And anyway, now you've got the dude from the Gauls like bleeding out. And then everybody's like, hey, calm down, this shit's crazy. And they left, the Gauls left, and they got mad at the Romans. The three people in the Romans that started all the problems were... I think senators or something there at the time. I don't know. But they were rich folks. All right. They had a lot of money and power. They were well known. Rome didn't want to give them up. And how convenient. That sounds like something, you know what I mean? The rich people not getting in trouble for crimes they've committed. Yeah, that doesn't seem like a surprise to me at all. But anyway, that's what happened. The Gauls were pissed. They were like, hey, we don't like that. We're going to go kick your ass now. That's basically what the Gauls said. Or you can give up those three guys. They were basically like, you can give us the three dudes that caused these problems. And it was dudes, because at that time in Rome, you couldn't have women on the committee. In fact, in Rome, the only people who were allowed to vote was a class of people called the patricians, which were all basically wealthy landowners. They were basically all the rich people. I mean, that's who was allowed to vote. If you were broke, if you were just a farmer, if you were just a peasant, or what they called a plebeian, you weren't allowed to vote. But you also weren't necessarily required to serve in the armed forces. This is something interesting I found about Rome while learning all this, is that, and I should probably talk about this in a second, because it comes more important in a second. Okay, so the Gauls, they're mad. Okay, they're like, hey, Rome, they didn't keep their word, and in our meeting they killed one of our guys, so now we're really angry, and we either want the guys responsible or we're going to come kick your ass. That's where we're at now. And so basically Rome was like, we don't want to know what to do. And like, we're not going to hand over these. They weren't going to hand over their rich, powerful people that make half their decisions and pay half the army or whatever. So they're like, no, we're not giving you these guys. So they did something kind of sneaky. For once, they put a vote, kind of a fake vote, but they gave a vote to the people. Which, like I just said, the only people allowed to vote were patricians. But now, all of a sudden, they're letting everyone vote to say, hey, should we give up these 3 guys? Of course, everybody says no. So this is where things got really interesting to me. I know I just wasted a lot of time talking about that one small part. But it is important because before this time, Rome wasn't really all that powerful. Like I said, they conquered other parts of Italy. But the other city-states and forces in Italy at the time were pretty small. They didn't have a lot of troops. They didn't have a lot of specific training. They didn't have very good equipment. They weren't well organized. They were also fighting amongst each other a lot of the time. Rome spent several decades at peace just because all their neighbors were fighting each other. So it's kind of one of these climates where if somebody's clever and organized, they can probably take things over. But the Gauls were actually pretty badass. And so when the Gauls came down, they were mad. Rome didn't give up the dudes that killed their commander or whatever, their representative, their diplomat. And so they sent an army all the way to Rome in like 2 days. They literally walked from France to Rome in like 2 or 3 days. Like it literally, like I don't know how they did this shit, wearing armor and having spears and stuff like that, and like horses. And I mean, I imagine they had to have carts with like food and supplies and all that. And somehow they just walked like 3 or 4 countries in like 2 days. Well, maybe it took them slightly longer than that, but it did not take them long. And then they basically came into Rome and kicked everybody's ass and burned everything. And they did what they said they were going to do. And when you hear that part of the story, and this happens pretty early on, like Rome was formed in like 750 BC, like I said. This is happening at like 6 to 500 BC. So this wasn't even that long. Like, you would think at this point, I would think, oh, it's over for Rome. It's over. They got their ass kicked. Now they're just going to be a little city-state again and have to play the game like everybody else. But that's not what happened. Somehow, this tiny little city-state, which has conquered a few surrounding city-states at this point, has now just gotten their ass whooped and burned down and razed and leveled, and most of the people fled. Oh, they had one saving grace, and that's that they did have a part of their army that was like in another town because they fled early on, and then they came back in and they got the Gauls to leave. But it's still strange because the Gauls kind of held Rome at under siege until both sides were starving, and then this other Roman regiment comes in and saves the day, basically like Gandalf. But it just seems weird, like they weren't, like Rome wasn't badass yet. But after that, apparently, according to the historians, and this is what I was going to talk about earlier, but I saved for now. After that defeat, that's when Rome realized they needed to step their game up. They were like, well, we don't want this to happen again, you know. And so apparently that's when they came up with the strategies, like all their strategies. Like they used to use this thing called a phalanx. Like the Greeks used the thing called a phalanx. I don't know. I guess they just lined everybody up with shields and spears, whatever. And the Romans came up with a different way to do it that was more suited for the way that they fight in the areas they live in. And also, I guess they came up with better shields and better armor. But anyway, that's the explanation, is like, oh, they were able to conquer everybody because they had slightly better tactics and they had I guess, slightly better armor and stuff. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I guess that makes sense. Like they say, the Mongols conquered so much just because they had horse archers. And I'm like, I mean, I guess that makes sense. I don't know. It just seems weird. Like, I mean, I guess horse archers is kind of deadly because if you think about it, you got somebody zipping around on a horse and you got some dude on a wall trying to shoot him with a bow, and all of a sudden it's going to be really hard to shoot the dude with a bow, and yet he knows how to shoot a bow on a horse and you're standing still, so I guess that makes sense unless you're like strafing or something while you shoot your bow at the horse. But anyway, I don't know. There's a lot of crazy stuff that happened back then, but Rome eventually conquers like that whole Mediterranean space, but they never go across the ocean. And I always wondered like why more people didn't cross the ocean, because it just seems like, I mean, it just seems like they would. I don't know, like, I mean, everybody now in modern times crosses the ocean, so it just seems like in the past, like, maybe they didn't have ships that could do it. But when I looked at a map, I found out the reason the Vikings could do it is because they were going from, like, Norway or Sweden or wherever they were at to, like, Iceland, which is like an island. There's not a whole lot of space. And then they jumped from Iceland over to, like, Greenland, and then they could have, I mean, potentially they could have gone from Greenland straight into Canada or wherever. Like, they didn't have to make large jumps to do it. So, I mean, that, I don't know. That's a possibility, but the Romans never did that. They would have pretty much had to cross straight over the Atlantic, which is a big jump, especially if you have the type of ships they had back then and you don't have islands in the middle to stop at. So that's probably part of it. But it just seems like, I don't know. It's also interesting because at this part of time, there's all sorts of people in Asia. There's all sorts of people in Africa. There's all sorts of people in, I'm pretty sure at this point in time, there must have been people in South America. There must have been a lot of people there already. There must have been people all over the world, but the only known history at the time is this small little area in the Mediterranean. I guess that's if, you know, if you're in the West, then that's all you know about is Western history. But it just seems strange to me that, I don't know, man. It's funny, like, these empires, they grow, they rise, they get so big, but they're really not that big still. And then they collapse, and then they don't even exist. Like, Rome collapses, and then it's gone. And then several hundred years later, you've got the Holy Roman Empire, which pops back up. But that wasn't really Rome. That actually started, I think, in Austria. And anyway, that's a whole different part of history. But it's just crazy to think all these wars and all this expansion and all this stuff was happening hundreds of years ago, like even thousands of years ago, actually, because it's 2021, so that would be, 1,600 years ago was basically the height of the Roman Empire. So, I mean, we're talking about 1,600 to 2,000 years ago. Like, people were just out here, like, it was just all, everybody was fighting, everybody was at wars. Rome did do something interesting, though. They didn't always conquer people by raping and pillaging and doing war, which was a common strategy at that time. And that's what the Mongols preferred. The Mongols pretty much wiped out everything. If they came through your town, you were fucked. The Vikings, it depended. If Vikings showed up, they might just want to steal all the stuff. They might just want to steal all your gold. But they did some pillaging and stuff too. But you might get lucky. With the Mongols, you weren't going to get lucky at all. They were going to rape and pillage and kill everything. And that was what they were about. The Romans were more like strategic. They would actually come into a new town and be like, hey, we want this to be part of the empire. We can come in here and beat everybody up. We can stab some fools, whatever. But, if you want to fight, then we'll fight. But if you want to join the empire, then, you'll have certain things, certain rights, and advantages as Roman citizens. You'll be part of the most powerful empire, and blah, blah, blah. Basically just a bunch of propaganda. The Romans were great at propaganda. And anyway, then they would assimilate the local cultures, local gods, stuff like that, into the empire and the Roman culture overall as a way to sort of pacify, I guess for lack of a better term, these new populations into the empire. And that's basically how they convinced everybody to join. They were like, hey, if you join us, you can still keep your culture. You just have to pay us taxes, basically, and we'll build you new roads, and we'll protect you with our armies. But if you don't want to join us, we're just going to conquer you, and that's that. So a lot of people joined. Some people fought back. But anyway, man, it's already been 27 minutes. It literally, I'm just briefly going over all this stuff because I've learned a lot about what was happening, and it was a lot. But one of the things that gets crazy... Hold on, I'll be right... So, one of the things that gets crazy is... I don't know. I'm pretty much at the extent of what I was going to talk about. Because now we're past, the Gauls. We're past, the expansion of Rome. I need to learn more about what was going on when things started falling apart. But one of the interesting things later on in the Roman Empire, which I just learned about recently, is that when they went to the east and they started conquering to the east, they started running into problems with cultures like the Jews and Arab cultures. And there was a lot of people to the east that were like, hey, we're not having this shit. We don't want to be a part of your thing. We have our own thing. We're good, son. And the Romans tried to conquer them. They tried to vassalize them the same way they had with everybody else. But the Jews in particular were like, nah, fuck that. You ain't our leader. You ain't part of our people. You don't know anything about our beliefs or how we do things, yada yada. They didn't want it. So, and that actually was probably earlier on than I'm thinking, because Rome did end up conquering a lot of that stuff. If you look at a map of at 400 AD, you'll see that Rome was pretty much everywhere, but it took them a while to get this stuff. And that's also the areas where later, because I think Jerusalem is part of this area and stuff like that. So these are all the areas, the cities, and the nations that were going to be involved eventually in the Crusades. But that wasn't going to be for another several hundred years. And that doesn't even really involve the Roman Empire. But anyway, it's just crazy. They basically expanded out so far until eventually they couldn't expand anymore, and then they kind of collapsed. And what's weird is I guess I have to wrap this episode up somehow, and I've just kind of been rambling about Rome, but this is one of the reasons why it's so strange to me when these empires come up, because after the fall of the Roman Empire, well, I guess you have different empires that come through. I mean, the Mongols were pretty big. I mean, they took over a lot. They took over a massive amount of land. After that, you have the Vikings did a decent amount, but the British actually end up doing a lot more. They take over a lot more. And then you've got, the Ottoman Empire. Eventually, you have the Holy Roman Empire. But the Holy Roman Empire wasn't as much of, one place that spread out and conquered, as much as it was different monarchies that were sort of coming together in a coalition of sorts. I don't know. I'll have to learn more about that too. I should have paid more attention in school. with history stuff, but it was boring to me back then. But anyway, it's just interesting because the Roman Empire is not really the first empire, and it's also not really the last. But for some reason, it's one of those ones that just sticks with everybody. I mean, to this day, like the United States of America uses the eagle as a symbol, and that was a Roman symbol. The Romans used the eagle. We use stars and shit like that and wreaths on certain things, and that was Roman. Like, we use the Roman alphabet. We use a Roman calendar. You know, we use a lot of different stuff. Like, it's, you know, still has a big influence on us today. I don't really have time to get into this yet, and maybe it's more conspiratorial, but it seems like the New Testament came all out of Rome. So, I mean, this is where I started getting interested in Rome. When I started learning how much of what's going on now goes all the way back to that, and that's hundreds and hundreds of years ago, I was like, dang, this is worth learning about because it affects a lot of things. But anyway, I'm done talking for now, and I'm just going to put this together and put it out there. And this will be episode 3, so anyway, thanks for watching the James Howp Show. If you've been watching, if you haven't been watching, it is what it is. I should probably tell people to like and subscribe, but really I'm just sitting here in my room talking shit, so I don't really care. But anyway, peace.